My husband said, "Our marriage feels like a trap, and I need to find my way out on my own." I said, "Then go." I canceled our Portland trip, called a lawyer before lunch, and cut off his retreat charges that night. By the next day, his sister was begging, and soon after, his mother was apologizing. My name is Elena Marlowe, and I'm 38 years old. Until that moment, I had spent most of my adult life believing that marriage didn't usually fall apart in one loud, cinematic explosion. I thought it frayed slowly, in invisible places, in the private spaces between conversations, in pauses that lasted a little too long, in smiles that stopped reaching the eyes. I believed that when something precious died, it usually died quietly first. I was right about that. What I got wrong was believing quiet meant harmless. Adrian and I had been married for 6 years. Not the dramatic kind of marriage. Not the kind with slammed doors, jealous scenes, or public declarations designed for other people to witness. We were the kind of couple who looked stable from the outside, disciplined, mature, functional in that polished adult way that makes people assume love must be safe if it looks organized enough. We paid bills on time. We remembered birthdays. We hosted dinners with decent wine and linen napkins we never would have bought when we were younger. We talked about paint colors for the guest room and whether the upstairs bathroom needed renovation before winter. We had routines so dependable they almost felt like proof of intimacy. For a long time, I mistook that predictability for closeness. And maybe in the beginning, it was. When I first met Adrian, he had this calm intensity about him that made him seem deeper than everyone else in the room. He wasn't the loudest man. He didn't flirt to perform. He listened. He asked questions like he meant them. When he looked at me, I felt chosen in a way that didn't feel flashy. It felt serious, thoughtful, like he had decided I was someone worth understanding. I built a life around that version of him. Or maybe more truthfully, I built a life around the version of us I thought that man represented. The first real signs of trouble were so subtle I almost resent them now. I would have preferred cruelty. Cruelty at least has shape. You can point to it, name it, defend yourself against it. But Adrian didn't become cruel. He became vague. At first, it was just fatigue. "I'm tired," he would say, rubbing the back of his neck as if the day itself had physically worn him down. Then it became something harder to identify. "I don't know, I just feel off lately." After that came the word that should have warned me more than it did. Stuck. The first time he said it, we were standing in the kitchen after dinner. I was rinsing plates, and he was leaning against the counter, staring at nothing in particular. It was a normal enough evening that his tone startled me more than the words themselves. "Do you ever feel like you wake up and realize your life is just repeating itself?" he asked. I turned off the water and looked over my shoulder. "You mean work?" He gave a short laugh without humor. "Not just work." I dried my hands slowly. "Then what?" He shrugged. "Everything." That should have been the moment I pressed harder. But marriage teaches you strange forms of patience. Or maybe fear does. Maybe when you sense a crack in something you love, your first instinct is not to examine it too closely. Your first instinct is to hope it's surface level, temporary, fixable with rest, kindness, and the right amount of restraint. So I told myself he was burned out. He had been working long hours. He'd seemed restless for weeks. There was no obvious affair, no sudden secrecy with his phone, no lipstick on collars, no obvious third-act villain waiting off stage. Just a husband who looked like he was slowly drifting inward, away from me, while still sitting at the same table every night. It's amazing what a woman can normalize when she is trying to save herself from the humiliation of naming the truth too early. Weeks passed like that, not broken exactly, but dulled. We still functioned as a couple in all the external ways. Grocery runs, mortgage payments, dinner plans, family calls, but something had gone strangely hollow at the center. Adrian would answer when I spoke to him, but more and more it felt like I was interrupting a conversation he was having privately with himself. One night, I found him sitting alone in the dark living room after midnight. I stopped in the doorway. "Why are you sitting here with no lights on?" He didn't look embarrassed. He barely looked surprised. "Just thinking." That answer landed badly. "About what?" He finally looked up at me then, and there was something almost apologetic in his face. Not guilt, not yet. Something colder. Distance trying to disguise itself as tenderness. "I don't know who I've become," he said. There are sentences that don't sound like threats until much later. I sat down across from him and folded one leg beneath me. "Then let me in," I said softly. "Talk to me." He stared at the floor for a long second. "I'm trying." But he wasn't. That was one of the cruelest parts of it all. He wanted the moral comfort of sounding conflicted without doing the vulnerable work of actually being honest, while honesty might still have changed something. He wanted room. He wanted gentleness. He wanted time to sort out feelings he was already arranging into a conclusion. And I, still operating as his wife instead of an observer, kept offering grace to a man who had quietly started withdrawing his loyalty from the room. The Portland trip had been my idea. 3 nights away. Rain, bookstores, late dinners, a hotel with oversized windows, and the kind of quiet that feels expensive. Nothing dramatic, just a pause, a chance to get away from routine and maybe return to each other without the constant static of daily life. When I first suggested it months earlier, Adrian agreed easily enough. But as the date got closer, his energy changed. One evening, while I was finalizing the reservation details, I asked, "Did you still want me to book that dinner at the place near the river?" He looked up from his phone like I had asked him about a dentist appointment. "Sure, just that." Sure. No smile, no follow-up question, no hint of anticipation. I held his gaze for a second too long. "You don't sound excited." I said yes, didn't I? His tone wasn't sharp. That almost made it worse. Sharpness would have at least acknowledged tension. But Adrian had started answering important emotional questions as if they were administrative inconveniences. I told myself not to overread it. I did that a lot back then. A few days later, he mentioned a retreat. Not ours, his. Some private weekend program a colleague had recommended. Remote cabins, guided reflection, nature walks, journaling. The kind of thing that sounded embarrassingly curated to me. But I kept that thought to myself because by then I was trying very hard not to become another problem in his mind. He described it as space to think. I asked, "About us?" He gave me a look I still remember because of how carefully blank it was. "About everything." Everything. That word created more fear in me than I admitted. There is something uniquely unsettling about being married to someone who begins speaking in broad, philosophical language right before detonating your life. It makes you feel like a practical detail in the story they're telling themselves about growth. After that, I started noticing things I wish I'd seen sooner. How often he said I when talking about the future. How rarely he used we unless the sentence involved logistics. How he began speaking about his own unhappiness as if it had emerged in a vacuum, untouched by choices, responsibilities, or the woman sitting right in front of him. One Sunday afternoon, while I was folding towels in the bedroom, I asked him the question I had been avoiding. "Are you unhappy with me?" He froze for half a second. That pause told me more than his answer ever could. "I don't know," he said quietly. I stood there holding a white bath towel in both hands, staring at him as if the shape of him might change if I kept looking long enough. Not no, not even a clumsy lie. Just I don't know. The room felt colder after that. Not literally, the kind of cold that starts under the skin, where dread lives before it learns how to speak. I slept badly that night. Adrian slept fine. That detail stayed with me too. If you've ever lain awake beside someone whose emotional exit has already begun, you know how violent that silence can feel. The person beside you breathes evenly, turns once, settles deeper into sleep. Meanwhile, your mind keeps circling the same invisible drain, trying to understand how someone can still occupy the space of a marriage while quietly evacuating its meaning. The conversation happened 3 days later. Late afternoon, pale light over the dining room table, the kind of ordinary hour that should have belonged to bills, emails, and deciding what to make for dinner. Adrian asked if we could talk. I almost laughed at the formality of it, as if married people ask permission to dismantle each other. I sat down across from him. He remained standing for a second, then changed his mind and took the chair opposite me. He folded his hands together so tightly I noticed the whiteness around his knuckles. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. There it was, the preamble of cowards and philosophers. I said nothing. He inhaled slowly. "Something has been wrong for a while." I kept my face still. "With us?" "With me," he said quickly, almost gratefully, as if redirecting the blame into abstraction made him a kinder man. I already hated the sentence before he finished the next one. "I feel like I've been living a life that doesn't fit anymore." I looked at him for a long moment. And where exactly do I fit in that sentence? His eyes flickered, not with remorse, with discomfort. He wasn't prepared for precision. He had prepared for sorrow, maybe anger, maybe pleading, but not precision. Then he said the line that split my life cleanly down the middle. "Our marriage feels like a trap, and I need to find my way out on my own." He said it carefully, calmly, like he had rehearsed it enough times to remove all emotional excess. It was the calm that stunned me most, not because I needed him to shout, but because it revealed how long he had been carrying this sentence privately before handing it to me like a final draft. Trap. Not burden, not strain, not confusion. Trap. A word that turns shared history into confinement. A word that makes one person's devotion sound like another person's imprisonment. For a second, the room disappeared into stillness. I remember noticing the sound of the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I remember a car passing outside. I remember the exact way Adrian avoided my eyes for just one beat after saying it, as if somewhere inside him there was still a small awareness that what he had done was monstrous. And then something in me went very, very calm. Because there are moments when pain comes rushing at you so fast that it burns through confusion on contact. It leaves only clarity. He wasn't asking to repair anything. He wasn't asking for counseling. He wasn't even asking me to understand. He was informing me that he had already repositioned himself emotionally outside the marriage and wanted the practical freedom to follow that feeling without resistance. He wanted release. He wanted to step away and still be seen as thoughtful. He wanted to wound me with self-discovery and not call it cruelty. I looked at him. Then I said, "Then go." That was it. No tears. No trembling lips. No cracked voice begging him to explain how long he had been planning this, whether there was someone else, whether any of it had been real. Just then go. For the first time in the entire conversation, his composure broke slightly. Not much. Just enough for me to see that he had expected impact, but not consequence. He had expected me to make staying difficult so leaving could feel justified. Instead, I handed him what he claimed to want. And suddenly, the speech he had prepared no longer made him look brave. It made him look like a man who had confused selfishness with enlightenment. He opened his mouth as if to say something else, maybe to soften it, maybe to revise the violence of the word trap, now that he had heard it, echoed back by my calm. But I stood before he could. "I'm not going to argue with a man who thinks loving him was a form of confinement," I said. "Elena." "No." My voice stayed level. "You want out? Go." I walked into the kitchen because I knew if I stayed there 1 second longer, the sheer insult of his framing might finally pierce through my composure in a way I refused to let him witness. Behind me, I heard his chair scrape softly against the floor. He didn't follow. Of course he didn't. Men like Adrian rarely chase the moment they thought would center them once they realize they no longer control its tone. That night, the house felt different. Not haunted. Stripped. He stayed upstairs for hours. I stayed downstairs with a glass of water I never drank, sitting in the dim light and staring at the dark reflection in the window. My hands were steady, my breathing was steady, even my thoughts were steady. But underneath that steadiness, something irreversible had clicked into place. Grief would come later. Shock too. But clarity arrived first. I thought about Portland. I thought about the retreat charges sitting on our shared account. I thought about how quickly people reveal what they believe they are entitled to carry with them when they decide you are no longer part of their emotional future. And for the first time since Adrian began drifting away, I stopped seeing our life as a marriage in crisis. I saw it as a structure already being abandoned by one person and quietly maintained by the other. That realization changed everything. Because once I saw it clearly, I knew exactly what I would do next. I woke up the next morning before my alarm. Not because I hadn't slept. Because I had. And that was the first sign that something inside me had already shifted. There was no racing heart, no panic clawing at my chest, no desperate need to replay the conversation from the night before, searching for hidden meanings or softer interpretations. There was only stillness. The kind that comes when your mind stops negotiating with reality and finally accepts it exactly as it is. Adrian had already left the marriage. Not physically, not officially, but emotionally, structurally, intentionally, he was gone. And once I accepted that, my role became very simple. I stopped reacting as his wife and started thinking like someone closing a chapter. The house was quiet when I stepped into the kitchen. Morning light came in softly through the window, touching everything in that calm, indifferent way sunlight always does, like nothing important had happened at all. Adrian wasn't downstairs. I didn't check. I didn't need to. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't measuring his presence to understand my place in the room. I made coffee, sat down, opened my laptop, and instead of staring into nothing like I might have a week earlier, I started making decisions. Not emotional ones, structural ones. The Portland trip was first. I pulled up the reservation, read through the confirmation one last time, not because I needed to, but because something about seeing it written out made the finality feel clean. 3 nights. Riverview. Non-refundable after a certain date. I hovered over the cancel button for less than a second. Then I clicked it. No hesitation. No speech. No quiet hope that maybe we would still go and fix something that no longer existed. The confirmation email came through instantly. Canceled. Just like that. One future removed. I took a slow sip of coffee and moved on to the next thing. The lawyer. That part might sound dramatic to someone on the outside, but it didn't feel that way to me. It felt necessary. Because Adrian had already reframed our marriage as something he needed to escape. And when someone makes that decision, you don't wait to see how gently they plan to exit. You prepare for the version that hurts you the most. I didn't call a random office. I called someone recommended months ago by a colleague who had gone through a divorce so clean it barely left fingerprints. At the time, I had saved the number out of vague practicality. That morning, it became relevant. The assistant answered on the second ring. I introduced myself. Calm voice, measured tone, no cracks. I'd like to schedule a consultation as soon as possible. She asked a few standard questions. Nothing personal. Nothing emotional. Just logistics. Name. Availability. General reason. I answered everything without hesitation. By the time I hung up, I had an appointment set before lunch. That was the moment it became real in a different way. Not emotionally. Legally. Which in some ways is far more permanent. I closed my laptop and sat there for a second, letting the silence settle around me again. Still no panic. Still no grief. Just clarity expanding into something sharper. That's when I thought about the retreat. Adrian's retreat. The one he had described as necessary. The one he had framed as part of his process. The one he fully expected to attend while still benefiting from everything our shared life provided. That was when something colder moved through me. Not anger. Precision. I reopened my laptop. Logged into our shared account. Scrolled through recent transactions until I found it. There it was. The deposit. The remaining balance scheduled. Dates. Location. Everything neatly organized. A weekend designed for him to find himself. Funded by a life he had just called a trap. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I canceled the payment. No message. No warning. No discussion. Just a clean, administrative decision. Because if he needed to leave the marriage to find himself, then he could do it without the marriage financing the journey. The system processed it immediately. Canceled. Just like Portland. Just like everything else. I closed the laptop again. And for the first time that morning, I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. Not in relief. In recognition. Something had shifted in the balance of the situation. Adrian thought he had initiated an exit. What he didn't understand yet was that exits don't stay theoretical once both people start acting on them. They become real. Fast. Upstairs, I heard movement. Floorboards. A door opening. Water running. Normal sounds. But they no longer felt connected to me. They felt like background noise in a life I had already started stepping out of. I stood up, rinsed my cup, and placed it carefully in the sink. Then I went upstairs. Not to confront him. Not to argue. Just to get dressed. Adrian was in the bathroom when I passed by. The door was slightly open, steam spilling into the hallway. For a brief second, I saw his reflection in the mirror. He looked normal. That was the unsettling part. No visible weight of what he had said the night before. No sign that anything had fundamentally changed. Because for him, it hadn't. Not yet. He was still operating under the assumption that emotional declarations exist in a kind of suspended space. That you can say something like that, and then negotiate the reality afterward. I didn't stop. I didn't speak. I walked into the bedroom, chose my clothes, and dressed with the same steady movements I always had. By the time I came back downstairs, he was already in the kitchen. Coffee in hand, phone in the other, scrolling, like any other morning. He glanced up when I entered. There was a brief pause, something uncertain flickering behind his eyes. "Elena," he said. I looked at him. Not cold, not warm, just direct. We should probably talk about last night. There it was, the soft revision, the attempt to reopen something he had already closed. I picked up my bag from the chair. "We did talk," I said. His brow tightened slightly. That wasn't a conversation. I held his gaze for a second. It was enough. That unsettled him. I saw it clearly this time. Because for the first time, he realized I wasn't moving in reaction to him anymore. I was moving independently of him. "I didn't mean," he started. I cut him off, not with volume, but with timing. "You said exactly what you meant." Silence. He shifted his weight slightly, as if trying to recalibrate. "I just think we should slow this down," he said. "Figure out what this actually means before making any decisions." There it was again. The word decisions. As if what he said last night wasn't already one. As if I was the one accelerating something. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. "I already have," I said calmly. His expression changed again. More noticeably this time. "What does that mean?" I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know. Because I chose not to explain. You said you need to find your way out on your own, I said. I'm respecting that. Elena? I have a meeting this morning, I added, stepping past him. That stopped him. A meeting? He repeated. I paused at the doorway, just long enough to let the weight of it land without elaboration. Yes. I didn't tell him it was with a lawyer. Not yet. I didn't need to, because the shift had already begun. And for the first time since he started drifting away, Adrian was no longer the only one quietly making decisions about what happened next. I walked out of the house without looking back, and behind me, for the first time, I could feel it. Not control, not power, but consequence, finally starting to catch up to him. By the time I finished the consultation, the word divorce no longer felt abstract. It felt procedural, structured, manageable. The lawyer, precise, composed, almost clinically calm, didn't ask me how I felt. She didn't need to. She asked what had been said, what accounts were shared, what assets were joint, what timelines might matter. Facts. That's what she worked with. Not emotions, not intentions, just facts. And the most important fact was simple. My husband had clearly expressed a desire to separate his life from mine. Everything else followed from that. When I walked out of the office, the air felt different. Not lighter, just sharper, defined. I checked my phone. 3 missed calls, 1 voicemail, all from his sister. I stared at the screen for a second before pressing play. Her voice came through immediately. Tight, rushed, already leaning toward panic. Elena, I don't know what's going on, but Adrian just called me and said something about you canceling the trip and something about money. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can you call me back? I ended the voicemail before she finished. Not because I didn't care, because I already understood. He had started explaining. And like most people caught between accountability and image, he had chosen a version of the truth that made him sound less responsible. I called her back. She picked up on the first ring. Elena, thank God. What's happening? Adrian said you canceled everything this morning. He sounded... She hesitated, searching for the right word. Confused. Of course he did. I leaned against the side of my car, the phone pressed lightly to my ear. There's no misunderstanding, I said calmly. Silence on the other end. Then, quieter, more careful. Then explain it to me. I could hear the shift in her tone. Not defensive. Concerned. But still operating under the assumption that this was a conflict that needed smoothing. He told me last night that our marriage feels like a trap, I said, and that he needs to find his way out on his own. Another silence. Longer this time. He didn't say it like that, she said finally, almost automatically. I almost smiled. He said it exactly like that. She exhaled slowly. I think what he meant was... I'm not interpreting, I said gently. I'm responding. That stopped her. Because there's nothing people can soften when you remove interpretation from the conversation. They can only deal with what was actually said. He just needs space, she tried again. He's been overwhelmed. You know how he gets when he's... He doesn't need space from me, I said. He defined the marriage itself as something he needs to escape. Her voice dropped. So, you're, what? Ending everything because of one conversation? There it was. The reduction. The instinct to compress something irreversible into something fixable. I looked out across the street, watching a couple walk past, laughing at something I couldn't hear. It wasn't one conversation, I said quietly. It was the conclusion of many. Another pause. This one heavier. I just think you should slow down, she said. Canceling things, cutting off money, it feels extreme. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, what feels extreme is being married to someone who sees your life together as something he needs to escape alone. She didn't answer immediately, because she couldn't, not without contradicting the version of events she had been given. I'm not punishing him, I continued, my voice steady. I'm aligning with what he said. And what does that mean? She asked softly. It means he's free, I said, completely. That word landed. I could hear it in her silence. Because freedom, when it's real, comes with loss. And people rarely consider that part when they ask for it. I think you're making this bigger than it needs to be, she said finally. But there was less conviction in her voice now. No, I said, I think he did. I ended the call a few seconds later. Not abruptly. Just finished. When I got back in my car, I sat there for a moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Still no shaking. Still no tears. Just that same steady clarity. My phone buzzed again before I even started the engine. This time it was Adrian. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Elena, he said immediately, his voice tighter than it had been that morning. So it had begun. You canceled Portland? Yes. And the retreat payment? Yes. A pause. Not the controlled pauses from last night. This one was different. Less composed. More reactive. Why would you do that without talking to me? I leaned back slightly in my seat. Because you already did, I said. What does that even mean? It means you made your position clear. Another pause. Longer this time. I could almost hear him trying to reorganize the situation into something he understood. I said I needed space, he said finally. No, I replied. You said our marriage feels like a trap, and you need to find your way out on your own. That's not the same thing. It is when you say it like that. His breath came through the line sharper now. You're overreacting. There it was. The shift. From confusion to defense. I closed my eyes for a brief second. Not in frustration. In recognition. No, I said calmly. I'm responding appropriately. Elena, come on, he said, his voice softening slightly, reaching for something more reasonable. You don't just cancel everything overnight. We need to talk about this like adults. We did talk, I said. You just didn't expect me to listen. Silence. Thick. Uncomfortable. I could feel it settling on him now. The first real sense that something had moved beyond his control. I didn't say I was leaving you, he said. I opened my eyes and looked straight ahead. You didn't have to. That landed harder than anything else I'd said. Because it stripped away the space he was trying to retreat into. The space where words could still be adjusted. Reframed. Softened. Elena. He started again. Slower now. More careful. I think you're taking this further than it needs to go. I almost laughed. Not out loud. Just internally. Because that's what people say when consequences arrive faster than they expected. I don't think you understood what you said last night, I replied. I understood it perfectly, he snapped, then immediately softened his tone. I just think we need to slow down and figure things out. I shook my head slightly, even though he couldn't see it. You already figured it out, I said. I'm just respecting your conclusion. Another silence. But this one felt different. Heavier, because something had shifted on his side too. Not clarity. Realization. I didn't expect you to... He stopped himself. To what? I asked. He didn't answer. Because the truth was simple. He didn't expect me to act. He expected me to wait, to hold the space, to stay emotionally available while he decided what to do with his life. And now that space was gone. Elena, he said finally, quieter now. Can we just not do anything drastic until we talk tonight? I considered that for exactly 1 second. Then I said, I'll be home later. Not yes. Not agreement. Just information. And then I hung up. As I started the car, I felt it clearly for the first time. Not anger, not sadness, but something far more stabilizing. The shift, the one he had tried to initiate alone, was no longer his to control. By the time I got home that evening, the house felt staged. Not in the obvious way. Nothing had been moved. Nothing was out of place. The same furniture, the same lighting, the same quiet hum of a life that, on the surface, hadn't changed at all. But underneath it, something was different, like a room after a conversation that can't be undone. Adrian was already there, sitting on the couch, waiting. That alone told me everything I needed to know. He never waited. Not like this. Not with his phone untouched beside him. Not with his posture slightly forward. Not with that tension in his shoulders that said he had been rehearsing what to say long before I walked through the door. I set my bag down slowly, took off my shoes, moved through the space like I always did. Routine. Because routine, in moments like this, becomes its own kind of control. Elena, he said. I looked at him. Not cold, not warm, just present. We need to talk. I gave a small nod. We've already done that. His jaw tightened slightly. No, he said. We didn't. We had a moment. That wasn't a real conversation. I walked past him into the kitchen, pouring myself a glass of water before responding. That was the most honest conversation we've had in weeks. He stood, followed. Of course he did now, because now the distance mattered. That's not fair, he said, his voice controlled but strained. You took one thing I said and turned it into this. I turned to face him. I didn't turn it into anything, I said calmly. I accepted it. That's not what I meant. There it was again. The revision, the softening, the quiet attempt to rewrite impact after seeing the reaction. I held his gaze. Then what did you mean? He hesitated. Not long, but long enough. I meant I've been feeling trapped in my life, he said. Not just our marriage. I tilted my head slightly. But you said our marriage feels like a trap. That's not... He stopped himself, exhaled, recalibrated. That's not how I meant it. Then why did you say it that way? Silence. And there it was. The gap between intention and truth. Or maybe more accurately, between what he wanted to feel justified saying and what he was now trying to survive having said. I'm trying to figure things out, he said finally. That's all. No, I said softly. You already did. That landed harder than I raised my voice ever could have. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the kitchen, like the movement itself might help him reorganize the situation. You canceled everything, he said, without even giving me a chance to explain. I gave you space, I replied. That's not space. It is when someone says they need to leave the marriage to find themselves. I didn't say I was leaving you, he snapped again, frustration breaking through the careful tone he'd been trying to maintain. I didn't react. I didn't step back. I just stood there, steady. You didn't have to. Silence fell between us again. But this time it wasn't neutral. It was heavy. Because he was starting to understand something he hadn't considered before. That words don't stay theoretical once they're spoken out loud. They become decisions. And decisions carry weight. I think you're punishing me, he said finally. That almost made me smile. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm agreeing with you. His brow furrowed deeply now. That doesn't make any sense. It does, I said. You said you feel trapped. I'm removing the trap. That stopped him. Completely. Because there's no argument that fits cleanly against that kind of logic. You're twisting this, he said, but there was less certainty behind it now. I'm simplifying it. Another pause. Longer. More fragile. Because now he wasn't arguing from confidence anymore. He was reacting from discomfort. I just needed time, he said quietly, to think. You had time, I replied. That's not what I mean. I know, I said. And that was the problem. I did know. He wanted time while everything stayed the same. He wanted to emotionally detach without immediately losing the structure that supported him. He wanted freedom without consequence. And that version of reality no longer existed. A phone rang. Not mine. His. He glanced at it, hesitated, then answered. Mom. Of course. I turned slightly, leaning against the counter, not leaving, not interrupting. Because this was part of it too. Yeah, I'm with her, he said, his voice tightening. A pause. Then, no, it's not like that. Another pause. Longer. His eyes flicked toward me briefly, then away. I didn't say it like that, he said, quieter now. I didn't move, didn't react. But inside, something settled deeper, because now it was happening. The version of the story he had told was meeting reality. I just said I needed space, he continued, pacing slightly now. She's overreacting. I almost laughed. Not out loud. But the instinct was there. Because that's what people do when their narrative starts slipping. They reduce the other person's clarity into irrational emotion. It's not that simple, he added quickly, hearing something on the other end. No, I didn't mean... He stopped. Listened. Then his shoulders dropped slightly. Okay, he said. I'll talk to you later. He hung up. The silence that followed was different. Thinner. More exposed. My mom just thinks this is a misunderstanding, he said. I nodded once. She would. That doesn't bother you? I looked at him. No. He frowned. Why not? Because it's not her marriage. That landed. Hard. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. This is getting out of control, he muttered. I straightened slightly. No, I said. This is what control looks like when both people have it. He looked at me then. Really looked. And for the first time since this started, I saw it. Not anger. Not defensiveness. Something quieter. Something closer to realization. Because the version of me he had expected, the one who would bend, wait, absorb, and adjust, was gone. And in her place was someone he didn't know how to negotiate with. I didn't think it would go like this, he said finally. I believed him. That's because you thought you were the only one making decisions, I replied. Silence. Heavy. Final. And in that silence, something settled between us. Not resolution. Not peace. Just truth. Unavoidable. Unmovable. And for the first time since he said the word trap, I could see it clearly in his face. He was starting to understand that leaving wasn't the only thing happening anymore. He was losing something too. He didn't leave that night. That was the first thing that told me everything had already started unraveling for him. A man who had been so certain, so composed when he said the word trap, should have walked out the door with clarity, with purpose, with that same quiet conviction he used when delivering the sentence. But Adrian stayed. Upstairs, moving slower than usual, opening and closing drawers, like he wasn't sure what he was supposed to take. I didn't follow him. I didn't ask. Because by then, I understood something he didn't yet. Certainty sounds very different in your head than it feels in your hands. I stayed downstairs. Same spot. Same chair. Different reality. At some point, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Measured. Hesitant. He stopped at the bottom like he was entering a room he didn't recognize anymore. Elena. I looked up. He was holding a small bag. Not packed. Just gathered. Like he had started the action without finishing the decision. I think I'm going to stay at Daniel's for a few days, he said. There was something fragile in the way he said it. Not confident. Not resolved. Trying. I nodded once. Okay. That was all. No follow-up. No, when will you be back? No, do you need anything? Just acknowledgement. And for a brief second, I saw it land. Not dramatically, but enough. Because he expected friction, emotion, something to push against so the leaving would feel real. Instead, I gave him nothing but space. Real space. The kind he had asked for. He shifted slightly, adjusting the strap of the bag. I just need some time to think, he added. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I didn't hear him, because I had already processed it. You said that already, I said calmly. His jaw tightened. That doesn't mean it's not true. I didn't say it wasn't. Silence. He stood there a moment longer, waiting. For something. I didn't give it. Eventually, he nodded once. Okay. And then he walked out. No slammed door. No dramatic exit. Just the quiet sound of the front door closing behind him. And just like that, the house became something else. Not empty, not broken, just mine. I sat there for a while after he left. Not moving, not thinking too hard, just feeling the shift settle into place. This wasn't the moment everything collapsed. It was the moment everything clarified. Later that night, I walked upstairs, opened the closet. Half his things were still there. Of course they were. People rarely leave completely the first time. They leave in pieces, expecting the rest to wait for them. I didn't touch anything. Not yet, because I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. The next morning, the silence in the house felt different. Not heavy, clean. I moved through it easily. Coffee, shower, dressed, routine again. But this time it wasn't shared. It was mine alone. My phone buzzed around mid-morning. A message from him. Hey, I think we should talk tonight. Just calmly. Figure out what this actually looks like. I stared at the screen for a moment, then locked it. No reply. Because there was nothing left to figure out. He had already defined the situation. He just didn't like what it looked like now that it was real. An hour later, another message. I don't think we should rush into anything permanent. That one almost made me smile. Not out of amusement, out of recognition. Because this was the part people don't anticipate. The moment when their own words start shaping consequences faster than they can adjust them. I still didn't respond. Not out of spite, out of clarity. By the afternoon, I was back at the lawyer's office. Paperwork this time, not just consultation. Real steps, real movement. Not loud, not dramatic, but irreversible in the way that matters. When I got home that evening, the house felt even quieter. Not empty. Settled, like something had already been decided and the space had accepted it. I placed my bag down, walked into the kitchen, and that's when I heard the key, the front door unlocking. I didn't turn immediately. I already knew. Adrian stepped inside, slower this time, careful, like he wasn't sure what version of the house he was walking into. Elena? I turned. He looked different. Not physically, but something in his posture had shifted. Less certainty, more awareness. I just wanted to talk, he said. I nodded once. We can talk. He exhaled, relieved at the permission. But he misunderstood it. Again. Because he thought talking meant reopening, revising, softening. We sat across from each other at the dining table. Same place, same chairs. Different meaning. I've been thinking, he said. I almost stopped him there, but I didn't. About what you said, he continued. About the marriage, about everything. I said nothing. Let him continue. I don't think I handled it right, he admitted. That was new. Not enough. But new. You didn't, I said calmly. He nodded slightly. I was trying to explain how I've been feeling and it came out wrong. No, I said. It came out clearly. He flinched. Just a little. Because clarity, once recognized, is harder to escape than mistakes. I don't want this to end, he said finally. There it was. The shift. The reversal, the late realization. I looked at him, really looked. And for the first time since all of this started, I saw it. Not confusion, not distance. Fear, but not fear of losing me. Fear of losing the life that came with me. I thought I needed space, he continued. But I didn't mean like this. I leaned back slightly in my chair. But you said you needed to leave the marriage to find yourself. I didn't mean it literally. That almost broke the last thread of patience I had left. But I kept my voice level. Then what does that mean? He opened his mouth, closed it. Tried again. I just needed time to think without pressure. There was no pressure, I said. There was a marriage. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. I think we can fix this, he said quietly. I held his gaze. No, I replied. That word landed harder than anything else I'd said. Because it was final. He blinked, like he hadn't expected it. Not really. Why not? He asked, almost instinctively. And there it was. The question that always comes too late. I answered him simply. Because you already left. His face changed. Not dramatically. But enough. Because now, he understood. Not completely, but enough. And for the first time, he had no argument left. 2 months later, the house didn't feel empty. It felt precise. Every object was still where it had always been. But the meaning behind everything had shifted. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It didn't echo. It didn't press against my chest. It simply existed. And so did I. Without interruption. Without negotiation. Without that quiet, constant awareness of someone slowly pulling away while still standing in the same room. People expect collapse after something like that. They expect grief to arrive all at once. Loud, overwhelming, impossible to carry. But that's not how it happened. Not for me. Grief came in smaller, quieter forms. A second cup of coffee I didn't need to make. A moment of instinctively reaching for my phone to share something, and stopping. A passing thought about Portland when it rained one afternoon. Then, nothing. No spiral. No need to rewind the story and search for where it could have gone differently. Because I already knew. It didn't break in one moment. It revealed itself in one. The legal process moved forward exactly the way my lawyer said it would. Clean, structured, efficient. No dramatic fights over assets. No drawn-out emotional negotiations disguised as financial ones. Because Adrian didn't fight it. That surprised people. Not me. By the time paperwork becomes real, most people understand whether they're defending something or just delaying the inevitable. And Adrian, for all his confusion earlier, wasn't a man who could convincingly pretend something still existed once it had been clearly named. That didn't stop him from trying to reshape the story, though. I heard about that. Not from him. From others. His sister called me once, weeks later. Not emotional this time. Careful. Measured. I think he's telling people it was a misunderstanding, she said. That things just escalated. I listened quietly. That he didn't mean what he said the way it came out, she added. Of course. Because that's easier. Easier than saying you dismantled your own marriage with a sentence you believed in at the time. Easier than admitting that clarity, once spoken, doesn't belong to you anymore. I didn't argue. There was no point. People can believe the version of events that makes them most comfortable. It doesn't change what actually happened. I'm not correcting him, I said simply. She hesitated. Why not? I thought about that for a moment. Because it wasn't indifference. It was something else. Because I don't need to, I said. And that was the truth. Clarity doesn't require defense. It stands on its own. A week after that call, Adrian reached out. Not a long message. Not emotional. Just, I've been doing a lot of thinking. I don't think I understood what I was risking. I read it once, then put my phone down. Because understanding always arrives late. After the words. After the consequences. After the structure of your life has already started to shift without you. Later that evening, I replied. Not immediately. Not impulsively. Just when it felt appropriate. You understood enough to say it. He didn't respond right away. And when he did, it was different. No argument. No attempt to soften. Just, I wish I hadn't. I stared at that message for a long moment. Because that was probably the most honest thing he had said in weeks. Not because it changed anything, but because it acknowledged something real. Regret. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind. The kind that arrives when there's nothing left to fix. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry. Because there was nothing left to say. You can't undo clarity. You can't return to a version of a relationship that only existed because one person hadn't spoken yet. Once it's said, it lives, and everything reorganizes around it. That night, I sat by the window for a while. The same place I had sat the night he told me our marriage felt like a trap. But I wasn't the same woman. Not broken. Not hardened. Just defined. There's a difference. I used to think strength came from holding things together. From staying. From enduring. From finding ways to make something work even when it was quietly pulling apart. I don't think that anymore. Now I think strength is knowing when something has already ended. And having the clarity to stop pretending it hasn't. Adrian wanted to find himself. That's what he said. And maybe he will. Maybe he already has. But he had to do it without me. Not because I pushed him away, but because he chose a version of freedom that didn't include the life we built together. And once that choice was spoken out loud, it became real. For both of us. If there's one thing I understand now, it's this. When someone tells you they need to leave your life to find themselves, believe them. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just clearly. Because the moment you accept it, you stop being part of the story they're trying to rewrite. And you start writing your own.